what extent can you see things, or can you make out images or text, or what is the extent of what you can see?
All sorts of those fabulous Australian animals that are, potentially going to kill you.
Yes.
But it was interesting in the sense that because it was so remote and we were all pretty hardy, I guess. And so we all learnt how to be very resilient
Mm.
and to just kind of get on with things and work out ways of adapting when things weren't ideal. Look, I think we all we like to think of this idea of being comfortable, like a comfortable life as something to pursue.
Yeah.
And in essence, that seems like it's a good idea because we don't really want to be uncomfortable all of the time. But
Mm.
having those moments of discomfort and facing your fears and going outside of that zone of where everything's all cool suddenly becomes a place of growth.
Welcome, Team ET. Today we're speaking with Fiona Demark in Melbourne, Australia. So my home country. So it's great to be back. Fiona, welcome to the ET project. I'm really pleased that we've been able to connect.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
So during the intro, I've mentioned many of the achievements that you've made over your life, and it's even more incredible. I'm not sure how many of our listeners are aware, but it's extremely incredible, given that you're officially or legally blind. And perhaps we can start by exploring that term legally blind, because it sounds to have an inherent distinction built into that term. So, is there
Mm.
differing levels of blindness? Is that the
Well, there
case?
is. So many people just sort of consider being blind as well. You can't see anything and you just see totally black.
Right.
And in actual fact, it's a bit of a spectrum.
Okay.
So there's people with low vision, there's people with no vision, or people that are blind, and that spectrum goes from, I guess, having some capacity to see some things versus a capacity where we all know that little chart that you read on the wall with
Right.
the letters and how many
Yes.
lines you can read down of the random letters. And once you get to a certain point where you can't see, the lines of letters, it
Yeah.
actually becomes a point where then you become what they consider to be legally blind. And so it's not just having a lower level of vision, it's actually, okay, well, you've crossed that boundary now where we say your eyesight is so bad that we consider you to be blind, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're completely can't see anything. It just means that your vision is so significantly reduced that it kind of becomes difficult to operate on a daily basis, I guess.
Okay. And do you have any feeling for like what percentage of vision you still have?
Gets really tricky because, of course, once you can't read that chart anymore,
Right.
it becomes very hard to judge. So my guess is my eyesight has deteriorated across the years. So I've sort of, experienced it getting worse in some ways. So that means that I would assume that maybe I've got possibly guessing about 10% or so left. So it's not a huge amount, but it's definitely better than nothing.
Right. Right. For sure. And so I'm a little bit fascinated. So I hope you don't mind me prying here a little bit. Um, like what extent can you see things, or can you make out images or text, or what is the extent of what you can see?
Yeah, it's more like large kind of shapes and being able to detect, light and dark. It's interesting. The things that are the same colors seem to blend in together, where if it's really opposite colors, I can
Right.
see it. Funnily
Okay.
enough, my peripheral vision, so what you see out of the corners of your eye,
Yeah.
is actually much clearer. So if I sort of wave my hand in front of my face, it's really hard for me to see it. But if I put my hand out to the side and wave my arm around, I can actually see my arm quite clearly. So it's quite interesting how it's sort of the central vision that's really deteriorated, and
Right.
the side vision, I mean, it's still not great, but it's slightly better than what is in the front. So Yeah, it's an interesting and very complex kind of answer that I just gave, but unfortunately, there's no straightforward one.
No, and I appreciate that. Thanks for clarifying. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but our listener base is quite global, and it's prominently business leaders. And so I'm really looking forward to our conversation because I hope that through this conversation we can trigger a little bit of, let's say, inward reflection with our listeners and challenge everyone to think about what they might be able to do more so than what they're doing today, um, for the community or for the workplace that would support the lives of people with disabilities. Now, I know that's a very broad um, topic, disability, and there's many different forms of disability. But I really want to challenge our listeners as they hear us in conversation to think about what may be possible from their perspective that they'd be able to do. So there's the challenge, Team ET. I really hope that you take it on board. I know it's a question, Fiona, that I've been asking myself since we connected, particularly after hearing um, you mentioned that something like 1 in 5 people, if I have that right, live with some form of disability. I mean, that was quite incredible. Um,
Yeah,
I,
yeah, and that's the people that feel psychologically safe enough to identify as having a disability.
mm,
And, you might also consider people that have got things like chronic medical conditions into that scope as well, especially if you're thinking from a work environment kind of perspective, because someone that has a chronic medical condition of
mm,
many descriptions may also need to have a different consideration or adjustment when it comes to, having a flexible work arrangement or something like that due to their condition as well. So
mm.
disability itself is 1 in 5, but if you sort of, actually really considered people's personal circumstances, those statistics might actually be higher.
Yeah, I find it quite incredible. Are there any, let's say, international organizations that our listeners can connect with, if you know of any, but maybe it's more country specific or even local level? Are there any organizations that you're aware of that people can sort of connect with and contribute to?
It really does happen to be quite, I mean, there are definitely global organizations, but from a, I guess, grassroots perspective and finding out what you can actually do to support people in your own environment, quite often that does end up being a country specific thing. So in
Yeah.
Australia, for example, we've got the Australian Network on Disability, and that
Mhm.
provides lots and lots of information in relation to, I guess, generalized workplace information and workplace adjustments and how to better assist people with disabilities. There's lots and lots of organizations out there, and then it becomes even more specific if you would like to know something about a specific type of disability. So, for example, you want to learn more about, vision impairment and low vision and blindness, then you would then sort of focus in on organizations that was their main specificity. So, in this instance, maybe something like Vision Australia would be a great resource to find out more about blindness. So there's a plethora of organizations out there. There's endless resources. You've just kind
Yeah.
of got to work out what aspect you want to learn more about before you start delving into the big deep dive, I would suggest.
Yeah. If we look at a fairly broad question, and I'm guessing it is quite broad, but I thought we'd ease into the topic through this. If we were to compare where we are today with maybe a decade ago, do you feel, as a general community, I'm referring to, do you feel that there's been a shift in the level of support that's provided? And I know you're talking from an Australian perspective, but do you feel there's a shift in support for people with disabilities in Australia?
Look, I think so in some ways, but in other ways, unfortunately not. And even just earlier today, I was having a conversation with somebody who had had a conversation with their direct manager who had, been newly, into the position. And so the prior manager was quite knowledgeable about this person's, circumstances.
Right.
And the new managers come along, there was no training provided.
Mm.
And all of a sudden, they've had a situation that was quite confronting with this manager today in relation to, their disability management. And, unfortunately, those situations still do occur. So even though we would like to say, yep, we're doing great and we've got inclusion and diversity policies and as a community, I guess we're more open to disability in some
Mm.
ways. Those barriers are still there for some people, and that's it's just about building more awareness and I guess, sometimes having those personal conversations because, you might think that you understand, but unless you actually ask somebody what's going on for you,
Right.
maybe you actually don't understand.
Yeah, that's interesting because when I look from a layperson's perspective from the outside looking in, I can see that as a general high level statement, there's probably greater awareness about people with disability and perhaps, government legislation, regulations mandating building compliance in a certain way, facilities seems to be more prominent. But I guess when you get to more of a local level and as you're talking at the moment, in the workplace itself, it's
Mm,
probably not that embedded or entrenched. So
yeah.
yeah, a nice,
And
nice awareness. Yeah,
mm, the interesting thing was too is that a discussion that quite often comes up is I guess many people don't realize all of the complexities that underlie people's everyday lives. So you see me walking down the street, and even if I'm using, I use a white cane, for example, it's
right,
like, oh, okay, she knows what she's doing. She's all right, yeah, but all good. But the thing is there's a whole lot of stuff that's gone into that process beforehand. So it's a little bit. I explain it like the duck on the water, yeah, like on the water, it all like what you see above the water, it's all calm and happy, and the duck's just doing its thing, but underneath it's paddle, 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 paddle. And that's a little bit like people with disabilities' lives in some instance. Like we're really sometimes quite exhausted by all of the things that we have to do to make that seem like it's so straightforward. So that activity of walking down the street means that I needed to know exactly where I was going, have the right shoes on, hope that there's no random construction that's been on the road, hope that everybody's chopped their trees so they don't hit me in the face. Like the
right.
list just goes on and on and on. So it's it seems on the surface sometimes like people are managing quite effectively, but there's a lot of background stuff that goes into that as well sometimes.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like I can visualize having seen people walking down the road with their cane, and I had wondered at some stage, how do they read, depending on their level of blindness, how do they read the street sign, for instance? How do they
Mm,
know where to turn, or if they don't? And even those that have the seeing eye dogs, there must be a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes for the dogs to be able to guide effectively as well. I can only imagine.
that's right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, incredible. Is there anything in the pipeline that you're aware of from the government perspective that's going to help with people with disabilities? Is there any legislation or discussions underway at the moment that is promising?
Not that I'm aware of. Look, I mean, I think there's always these things that are sort of, in place. And of course, the big discussion at the moment in Australia is our national disability insurance scheme. And
Okay.
so obviously there's quite a large proportion of the budget that is being implemented towards that.
Mm.
And whether that scheme is working well or not well and who is having the input into it is quite an area for discussion at the moment. And I think like anything, it's still relatively new. They're still sort of ironing out some of the bumps.
Right.
And for some people it's been life changing, but for others it's not particularly effective.
Yeah. And I guess one of the challenges that we all face is that disabilities is a very holistic, high level state word. There's so many forms of disability, right? And I can only imagine that certain government grants are more supportive to particular disabilities than they are for others. So, um, to that point, I'm wondering about, does that span even to a geographic perspective? Say, is it easier or harder to live in a city than it is to live in a rural environment with disabilities?
Interestingly, yeah, and interesting, I can reflect upon that because I actually grew up in a rural environment.
Right.
So, um, having said that, definitely the resources were much you kind of had to be much more innovative with the resources that you had,
Right.
and also to kind of think outside of the square because sometimes those resources weren't there. So
Mm,
essentially, when I was in school age, for example, that's where I was when I was sort of living in the rural area,
yeah.
and the kids in the city had access to be able to go and learn Braille from the Braille teacher. And they had, specific things set up to them. They had adaptive technology classes and all sorts of stuff that was just unheard of for me to even, I didn't even know a lot of the resources were even available, let alone, knowing how to access them. And
Mm,
look, it's probably been made better by the advances in technology with the internet and all of those sort of things now, because I mean, obviously, rural communities aren't quite as remote as they used to be in terms of if you've got an internet connection, you can kind of tap
yes.
into anything.
Right.
However, having said that, it's still not that one-on-one support that you would possibly get in the city.
Yeah, and that was my next thought as well, was how much is technology playing a role in driving the improvements for disabilities, or people with disabilities? Is it really introducing wide-ranging support, or is it still fairly limited?
It's definitely getting better, and it's certainly from my perspective with vision loss,
Right.
heaps better. So I've never learnt to learn Braille myself because adaptive technology is so good these days that you can, even your standard mobile phone that you buy over the counter will
Mm,
have accessibility features in it. So then you are not having to rely on special, you're not having to rely on special technology.
okay. To
So, yeah, so I mean, and look, some of it is still really expensive and really specialized, but as a
right.
general rule, I think, just even access to audiobooks, for example. I mean, when I was little, you had to go to the special tape library kind of thing, where now, I mean, we all use audiobooks as a mainstream kind of thing. So
Yeah.
technology has definitely made my life easier in many, many ways.
Right. I was reading a post or an article somewhere not too long ago with somebody talking about the apps that actually read the text, say in social media, um, have trouble when we use hashtags or when we don't use capitals and this type of thing. Have you found that to be the case?
Yeah, look, I mean, realistically, I mean, to be honest, I'm not really reading what people have hashtagged anyway a lot of the time, but definitely the answer is, say, for example, you're going to hashtag, I don't know, life coach, for example, then
Hmm,
definitely capitalize that second word because then the screen reader does read it out as hashtag life coach
right,
rather than try to put those two things together and make it into one word and trying to decipher what it is. So definitely, yes, using the capitals helps.
right.
Um, yeah, but
Yeah,
from a
that's what the
perspective of,
article. Right, that's what
yeah,
the
and
article. Yeah.
yeah, and social media especially as well. I think just explaining what is in your photographs sometimes. Like, I mean, the AI is pretty good now, so it will actually tell you this is a picture of this or this, and if you've got text in it, it'll generally read out what the text is.
Okay.
But yeah, look, I mean, putting a little bit more description in the notes of what your social media post is, rather than just relying on the visuals,
Right.
is really important.
Okay. And does it read the title of the picture? Like I know in social media you have the opportunity to put like a title quite often to the picture. Does it read that? Because you can't see it most of the time, but I'm just wondering, can it read it?
No. So
Okay.
so let's use the example where like you've got a picture and then you've added, how people sort of put a text across the top of the page or something like that. It doesn't read that out. No.
Okay. Understood. I saw one of the videos you posted where you were demonstrating something. I haven't been able to find it, but you call it a screen curtain on your iPhone. What can you explain what
Yeah.
that is? How does that help?
Yeah, so we've all got the access to use it, but it's just because I use VoiceOver on my iPhone, which is just able to be turned on in the standard accessibility features. So under general settings, there's a little accessibility section, and you can do all sorts of cool things. And one of
Okay.
those is turning the voiceover on, which means that it will read out everything on the phone to me as I touch it. So then the
Ah,
way that I operate my phone is slightly different, because instead of just tapping once, I tap once and it reads out what it is, and then I sort of double tap to get it to select something where you would just normally just tap on it once. Now,
ah,
because it reads everything out, I don't actually have to ever see the screen. And my vision is so poor that, stuff on the screen, I can't read the text anyway. So to
ah,
save my battery power and to be a little bit ninja so people can't see what I'm doing on my phone, I actually have the screen curtain turned on. So it literally has a black screen the whole time. So it's like my phone is asleep all of the
yes.
time. But in actual fact, especially if I've got headphones in, it's doing all sorts of things for me, but people just can't see that the screen's on.
I love it. I love that. Kudos to technology advances. So very good. You mentioned very briefly before that you grew up in the country, and to be more specific, you grew up, I believe, in Broken Hill, or
Hmm.
that area. Um, Now, for the people outside of Australia, they'll have no or little understanding of where that is. So I wonder if you could share with our listeners a little bit more about, what life was like for you growing up in really what is Outback Australia.
It is.
Yeah. So what was that like for you?
So Broken Hill is literally, like, if you think about a map of Australia, it's pretty much getting pretty close to the middle, actually, to be honest.
Yep.
Um, not quite, but it's far, far western New South Wales,
Mhm.
and quite isolated. The closest main capital city is in South Australia. So Adelaide is the closest capital city, which is not in the same state even. And that was at about a 5.5 hour drive away. And then the next sort of big town that was sort of, reasonable size, was about 3.5 hours away. So we had a town of a population of somewhere in between 15 and 20,000 people. It fluctuated quite a bit according to sort of, it was a mining town. So whether the mines were highly operational or whether they were struggling a little bit depended on the whole population.
Mhm.
So not a particularly tiny place, but just very, very isolated. And so where I grew up, on sort of, I guess the edge of where the township was. And so literally there was sort of, the bushland behind us, and there would be, brown snakes in the backyard in the summertime, and kangaroos bouncing around out the back in the bushes, and all sorts of those fabulous Australian animals that are, potentially going to kill you.
Yes.
But it was interesting in the sense that because it was so remote, and we were all pretty hardy, I guess. And so we all learnt how to be very resilient
Mm.
and to just kind of get on with things and work out ways of adapting when things weren't ideal. And so as a child, I mean, as I said, my vision was slightly better when I was a child as well. And so my mobility wasn't as affected as it is now. So I was running around like every other kid, getting up to all the same mischief, and when I needed a little bit of extra looking after, especially my eyesight has always been terrible in dark areas or at night time. And so, I always had a cousin or a friend or someone that was making sure I sort of didn't get myself into too much mischief. But yeah, it was a place where I guess we were free to go and explore and really have that country lifestyle, which was really amazing.
I'm horrified. I have this terror of snakes, and I've grown up myself in some parts of Australia's country, and I know there's a plethora of different types of snakes out there, and I can only imagine the types of snakes. Like for those listening, you can picture this arid landscape. In my mind, that's how I see it, at least, Fiona. This red soil.
Hmm.
I guess around Broken Hill, there was some sort of greenery that had been established, but within vegetation. But for the most part, kangaroos, snakes, spiders, perhaps,
Yep. Yep.
would have been some common occurrence, and for me, that would have been a nightmare. Now, the other thing I know about Broken Hill, and my knowledge is limited, so I apologise. The Flying Doctor Service was that the
Yes.
base for the Flying Doctor Service?
It was, and, in fact, there's a little bit of a story that goes with the flying doctor service.
Right.
So my parents actually met in a town that is, oh my gosh, probably closer to the sort of the Queensland border, so sort of north of Broken Hill, maybe by another few hundred kilometers, and that is tiny, like probably population of, maybe 200 people or something when they were there, and that's where they happened upon each other, and the romance sort of started to blossom, and my mum was like, no, no, not interested, not interested, not interested, and my dad was doing the usual, oh, but I really like you thing.
Yeah.
And he got sick and needed to go into hospital, and she was actually working at the hospital at the time, and the flying doctor had to come and fetch him, and it was when the flying doctor had to come and fetch him to take him to Broken Hill for treatment that she suddenly realized that she liked him. So so my dad's episode with the flying doctor actually, was part of my history in a sense, because if that had have never
Yeah.
happened, I wouldn't be here.
Fantastic. And I believe the School of the Air, and it used to be called something different, but I can't recall what it was now, um, also was based out there or had some
That
connection
is
with.
correct.
Right.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
my mum grew up on my grandfather was always based on the cattle stations and sheep stations up around that Queensland border kind of area. And
Mm.
so that was actually my mum's education, as she actually grew up doing that School of the Air correspondence kind of schooling.
Right. Yeah. It's quite a different lifestyle for many people listening. They'll have no idea what we're talking about. This is really um, living in conditions that those that grew up in the city have no relative understanding or association to. Now, the other claim to fame, based on what I was able to see, is there was a movie that was called The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert.
I was waiting for that. Yes. So yes, our international viewers, if you are interested in seeing what Broken Hill was like with a little bit of extra flair, definitely go and find yourself a copy of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. It was actually filmed when I was in senior high school, and the actors, my sister was actually working at one of the local accommodation locations, and so all of the actors and the crew for the movie actually stayed where she was working. So I managed to tag along one day when she went to work and meet the cast, which was really exciting. But yeah, so that was Priscilla, and that was literally happening while I was still living there.
The only memory I have of that movie is the Priscilla standing on top of the bus. I think it was Priscilla as the bus set sail off into the sunset type of thing. When did you leave Broken Hill? When did you move down to Melbourne?
I left literally a week after my 18th birthday. I got my high school exam scores, and I had put so much time and effort into making sure that my scores were going to be equivalent to get me into a university, and that was the plan. So essentially, I got the scores, I got the university entry, and off I went on the train with my suitcase to Sydney, and set myself up there and did university. So yeah, it was a big adventure, but
Okay.
something that I knew that I needed to do, because if I didn't leave Broken Hill, my
Mm.
prospects for a future were, considerably limited.
So you went to Sydney before you then shifted to Melbourne.
That's correct. Yep. I lived for somewhere between 10 and 15 years in Sydney, and about the same again now here in Melbourne.
Wonderful. And looking at your website, there's a particular page that shows you do a lot of adventures where you go searching for different things that others can come and join you with. Where did the desire and the drive come from to do this? Because when I look at it myself, I would think twice about whether I would do it with normal eyesight. For you being legally blind, I mean, it's really, I can only imagine, quite challenging. So where does the desire and the drive come from?
Um, I'm not even sure. I think it's just part of my personality. I've always been one of those people that's sort of a bit adventure driven. And as I said, we always used to get up to sort of all sorts of mischief living in the country.
Yeah.
And even like my first taste of adventure, I guess, was when I was about 14. I got invited to attend recreational camps for other people with other people that had a vision impairment. And
Okay.
so for me, literally, it was a bit of an eye opener. I got to meet other kids my own age that had a similar sort of, disability to what I had, which in Broken Hill, the only other people that had an eyesight problem were old people that had,
Mm.
age deteriorated eyesight. So
Yeah.
all of a sudden there's all these new kids that I met that were my own age, and I was like, "Oh, wow, this is fun." And on these camps, we got to do all sorts of exciting things. So we went abseiling and water skiing and horse riding and all of the things. And it was like, "Oh, cool, I can do these things." And in actual
Right.
fact, my disability doesn't stop me from doing these things.
Mhm.
And I think through that, I got a bit of a taste of adventure. So I think it's when I was 17, I went skydiving for the first time. So I did that while I was still out in Broken Hill.
Mm.
And then from there, I've just taken every opportunity that presents itself that creates a bit of an adventure. And look, I think we all we like to think of this idea of being comfortable, like a comfortable life as something to pursue.
Yeah.
And in essence, that seems like it's a good idea because we don't really want to be uncomfortable all of the time. But
Mm.
having those moments of discomfort and facing your fears and going outside of that zone of where everything's all cool suddenly becomes a place of growth.
Right.
And I find that it's really exhilarating to actually go and push those boundaries a little bit
Mm.
and be scared and wonder, hey, is this beyond my capacity? And then you do whatever it is that you do, and you find yourself feeling so proud and excited and full of energy afterwards. And I think that's probably the buzz that I look for. And so then I just keep on going back.
Now, if I was ever to have the audacity to think I was going to jump out of a plane, I would kind of hope that I was not able to see what I was doing because I'd have my eyes firmly closed and just be totally reliant on the person that was tandem jumping with me. So I can imagine that would be the only time where this might be a value add rather than a hindrance. But as you do all
Well, not
these,
not sure actually, because my eyesight was actually still reasonably good when I did that. So I definitely remember hanging off of the arm of the strut of the plane
uh,
and looking and seeing all the red dirt below me and going, okay, well, I've got to let go soon.
so you didn't even do tandem.
Yes, I did do it tandem, yeah.
Okay. It doesn't make any difference jumping out of a plane. It wouldn't matter if
Well,
it
once you're out that door, there's not a lot of choice. It's like, well, you're going now.
yeah, for sure. I can only imagine that, as there would be for anyone doing some of these adventures, for you there must be a lot of preparation involved. How do you go about that? Like, you have a group of people that support you with, helping you get ready for some of these things.
Yeah, somewhat. And look, I think there's a lot to be said for, and this is how I started doing this sort of in a more comprehensive way and putting the things
Right.
on the website is I believe that everybody should have access to any of these adventures and to be able to do these things regardless of their personal circumstances, as long as they know that it's within the bounds of safety. Then I think, there's a bit of an onus upon operators to actually then say, okay, well, this is not a ridiculous idea. Let's actually work together to see how we can make this happen. And for sometimes that is not doable, but in most cases, it might just mean a slight adjustment, or it might mean that you have to do it one-on-one instead of with a group, or whatever it happens to be. There's
Right.
usually a way of working around it. And I think, to be able to have access to those things that maybe people do these things when they go on holidays. And, some of the stuff that I've done, I've been in Queensland or somewhere else when I've done it. And, to be able to go on holidays with your family and you all decide that you want to go and do a particular activity, whether it be, as random as going on jet skis or jumping out of planes, or it might even just be that you want to go paddleboarding or canoeing or something a little bit more, relaxed.
Yeah.
Any of those things should be accessible to people with a disability
Mm.
just as much as it is to anybody else. So you should be able to rock up and go, you know what? Like, I'm giving you a bit of notice. I'm not just going to turn up on the day and expect everything to go perfectly well. But if I
Right.
know that I'm going to do it a couple of days before, to be able to make a phone call and say, hey, this is my situation. Is
Mm.
this something that we can work with? And most of the time, you'll find the operators say, yep, no worries. Let's see what we can do.
Yeah, that's really encouraging, I have to say. I saw a picture of you on the Gold Coast where you climbed uh, one of the tall buildings, or
Hmm.
the top of the tall building. I forget what it was called now, but the background of the picture looked a long, long way down. So well done in that regard. Yeah, let's fast forward now to present day and look at what you're doing. You're a keynote speaker, you're a resilience coach, you're a trainer, as well as you have a day job, I believe. So, um, what is it that you do um, for the majority of your time?
So, as you said, I do have a day job. So, my day job is I work for our Victorian Government Department of Transport and Planning. And I do my day-to-day activities within that role. And I'm also the staff disability advocate. So, I make sure that, people that are working with a disability at the department are supported, and
Right.
then sort of dabble a little bit in the whole Victorian Public Service Enablers Network as well. So lots of bits and pieces going on in the day-to-day job. And then outside of that, as you mentioned, I do the keynote speaking and resilience coaching.
Mhm.
I do a lot of one-on-one work with people in relation to just being able to set goals and achieve their dreams and keep motivated. And some of those people are people with disabilities that don't have an understanding of what they can actually achieve, because a lot of times people have been told, well, you can't do this and you can't do that, and all of a sudden to have someone to support them to say, well, maybe you can do it, just maybe we need to go about it in a different way. And
Mm.
so to help people that have a disability, but then to just help general people that are, it's amazing how many people just sort of get stuck on that little sort of, round and round and round, doing the same things all of the time and not achieving the things that they really want out of life.
Right. And if you were to characterize your typical clients as you work with them as a coach, you know, you've mentioned that it's people that are stuck, but what is it they're actually seeking to do, and how do you help them?
I think a lot of the times we just end up unhappy and we end up in a place where we don't feel in control of our own situations. And it's maybe because we're blaming something from the past, or we feel that we can't take responsibility for what's happening in our lives. Or these days, a lot of us are just caught up in the busy, 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 do this, do this, do this, do this. And we don't take any time out to actually do the things that we love and enjoy. And for everyone, I, get you to cast back to your childhood or the times that you've been most happy, and have a think about those activities and things that you liked to do, and then wonder how much time are you actually dedicating to that. Because at the end of the day, we're only here for a limited amount of time. And, for some people that time's longer than others. But whether you get to spend your time doing all of the things that are expected of you and are those responsibilities and are the things that sort of, we just do on a day-to-day basis,
Yeah.
versus spending some time doing things that you love and enjoy and that make you really thrive and have energy. Because if you don't do any of those things, you don't have the capacity to keep on giving all of that other time to those other things that, of course, we all need to do. Like, you need to, make sure that the dog goes for a walk and the kids get to school and you rock up at work so you can earn the money to pay the mortgage. Those things are important. But what's also important is making sure that you've got that energy to be able to fuel yourself to continue to do those things. Because eventually, if you just keep on doing all the things, you're going to end up burnt out.
Yeah, there's a lot of great examples. I think Stephen Covey used to get people on stage, and he would take a jar, and he had three different size stones or sand, and he would get people to try and fill it in different ways. And it's to your point, right? It's we get so caught up doing just everyday life that we sort of get lost and forget about some of the other things that light us up, that excite us, and it's
Mm,
so important. So yeah, very
mm.
very good. I
And
also
how
see
many
you.
times do we answer when someone asks you, "How have you been?" "I've been
Yeah,
busy." Is that a good answer? No, I've been doing the things that I love doing. How about that for an answer?
yeah,
It's very
yeah,
different.
very different. We've just come out of the new year. So, a lot of people have their resolutions that they set for New Year. I'm not a big fan on it, but I personally look at my bucket list at the start of each year, and I try and pick one or two things that this year I'm going to tick off that bucket list. So that's my approach to the new year. So this year, one of my dreams is to get to Costa Rica. So I'm still working on that. I haven't got the solution yet, but anyone out there that's listening, that's one of my bucket list items. So
Funny,
please.
funny you say that, actually, because I'm missing my dance lessons this month because that's exactly where my dance teacher is.
Oh, really? Incredible.
Yes.
Well, they should have taken me with them. That's the downside. Now, I understand that you're a member of the NLP Association of Australia, and have you studied NLP yourself?
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah. And so I'm guessing, therefore, you use that as part of your coaching practice.
I do. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And is there anything within the NLP approach? Like I've studied it as well, so I know, I won't say I'm an expert, but I know a little bit about it. So is there any particular area of NLP that you use when you're working with clients?
Um, I do a lot of anchoring exercises. And so, for those who don't know, anchoring is, we all do it. It's just that we don't consciously do it a lot of the time. So,
Mm.
you may have been anchored in a memory of like a smell of your favorite cooking from grandma, or,
Yeah,
someone's perfume, for example. So, they're good things that you've been anchored with. But you
yeah,
may also have been anchored by hearing a siren and remembering an incident where, you're in an emergency crisis situation and the siren came along. And so that's a bad anchoring. And so in being able to work with the things that are really good and, even create new anchors to be able to put yourself in a place where, you're feeling confident or you're feeling calm or whatever it happens to be, that's a really great resource to have. And then in reflection on that, then also looking at those things that are maybe anchored to us that are bad things, and then being able to re-establish those anchors and turn them into something else. So when you hear that siren, you don't feel that anxiety, that you can actually go, you know what, it's just a siren, I'm okay.
yeah. Yeah, there's many great techniques that you can learn through the NLP that helps with that anchoring. there's a Swish model
Hmm.
methodology that also helps you to move beyond some of the limitations and the beliefs. Um, I mentioned in the intro um, about some of the acknowledgements and the awards and nominations. One that I'd like to highlight here is that you were nominated for the 2023 Oz Mumpreneur Awards. So congratulations on that. Has that actually been completed now? Like those awards were in 23,
Yes.
or is that, yeah, right.
Yeah. So that all happened in, I want to say maybe November. And so I was a finalist in my category. However, I was not the winner. And the lady that was the winner is absolutely amazing. And I can see why she was the winner, because if you think I do all of the things, my goodness, this lady is just like 10 times more doing the things than what I am. And so yeah, but it was really fantastic to be involved in that. And I think, again, just acknowledging other people that are out there doing the things that they're passionate about. And especially for those particular awards, it was about, hey, well, I'm a mum, but I'm also a business owner, or I'm also doing other things. And sometimes we like to label ourselves and just say I'm one thing or I'm another thing, but in actual
Mm.
fact we're all multifaceted. And it's interesting when you sit down and you go, well, look at all of these things that I do. I'm actually, really talented at sometimes at all the different things that you may be doing that you don't even realize.
Fantastic. Fiona, you're really starting to find your groove, it seems like, with business, with life, and I can see that you have such passion. Are you working on anything at the moment? Like, is there anything in the pipeline for 2024 or beyond? Maybe a book, maybe another adventure, like anything coming up?
Like there's always adventures. Literally this weekend I'm going surfing. So go
Okay.
and see what that entails. And look, there is a book. Literally, I'm in final editing stages for that at the moment. So hopefully that will be out in the first half of this year, if not by mid-year. And yeah, that's a bit of a, I guess, a retelling of my high school years and the journey that took me on. And it wasn't just living with a disability, but it was also sort of, managing teenage identity and some school bullying and depression and all sorts of bits and pieces that were involved in those years. And of course, again, with that aspect of living in Broken Hill, it made that situation very different for my experience. So that's on paper at the moment, just sort of, getting finalized. And funnily enough, already the next one is on the brain, and that will be, I guess, more of a self-help version of the same thing. So I'm thinking to tie the chapters of the more memoir style kind of book to
Yes.
then more of a self-help process of, okay, well, when you're presented with these situations, what are some
Mm.
of the resources that you can use to actually help yourself get out of them? And that can relate to whether you're an adolescent or whether you're facing situations of grief or depression or identity crisis even as an adult.
Yeah. Excellent news, I have to say. And are you able to say the title of the book yet, or is it too
No, because I'm not even sure I've written it. But
early?
I think sometimes the process of writing, the title comes to you at the end once you've put it all together and you do that final reread. I think the title is going to jump out at me at that point and go, you know what, that's the right one.
Mm. Yeah, well, I look forward to it. Please let me know when it comes out. I'll keep a vigilance on you to make sure that I'll get a copy. So, um,
I will do.
thank you. We're coming towards the end, but a couple more questions if you'll persevere with me. Where's the best place for people to connect with you and sort of find out what you're doing, what services you offer?
Yeah, look, I'm all over social media. So I do have my website that you've mentioned a few times. So that's fionademark.com.au. And then from there, you can also connect up to all the social media. So I'm on, the TikTok and the Facebook and the Instagram and doing all of those things. And interestingly, the things that I can't do myself, I've sort of outsourced a little bit to have other helpers to, especially some of the non-accessible parts of those social media. I've got some helpers to sort of, help put bits and pieces together for that as well. So it's all happening. So yeah, just type in my name and I will appear.
Fantastic. We will put links in our show notes, of course, and yeah, look, we'll keep a vigilance on the book. So, any final words of wisdom for our listeners, what they can better support people with disabilities, whether that's at work or community? Any words of wisdom that you could share?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to not make assumptions and to go and speak to the person. I think we're so caught up in being politically correct and doing all the right things and being afraid to offend people now that sometimes we lose those opportunities to learn. And I think, as long as you're respectful and you go, hey, is there anything I can do? Can you explain if there's something that I can help with? Sometimes you're going to get an answer and they're going to do, no, I'm fine. I'm perfectly okay. Other times you're going to get the answer of, okay, yep, this is how you can help me, especially within the workplace. If you're, got someone in your team, someone that you're managing, just ask the question, how can I best help you?
Right.
And they might say, no, I'm fine. And then you just own that and go, okay, no worries. I'm here if you do need some help.
Yeah.
But it opens that conversation, and having open conversation, I think, is the easiest way to go. I mean, and that doesn't just go for disability. I mean, it goes for anything. If you see someone and you think they're struggling a little bit, go and offer that human support. I think we're so afraid to do it these days, and I think it's so important because we've lost a lot of that community, and that's one of the ways to get it back.
Yeah, great ideas and great support, great suggestions. So, Fiona Demark, thank you for being a guest on the ET project. Really enjoyed the conversation. Wish you well with future endeavours and also the book, of course. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so I can pop up in your feed occasionally with a great tip for your ultimate growth.